Welcome to Sunday Assembly. I know we have a couple of new faces, a lot of faces that have been here before and stuff. But a welcome to everybody. And one of the things that we like to do is make very clear that the ideals that you see listed on your program, we feel very strongly about. And we, especially the all-inclusive and all-tolerant. The one thing that we don't do is handle intolerance well. So, by all means, get to know the folks around you. This is a very casual, informal group. As you will see, we don't have a lot of structured stuff, including Harry and I. We never practice the stuff together. We just come in here and take it as best we can.
We're discussing it as we go.
So if there's surprises, you know, that's just our prerogative, what the heck. But welcome, and we hope that everybody gets something positive out of this, because that's basically all that we ask of people, is to keep it positive, get something positive, and hopefully you'll leave with something just a little more than what you came in with, and which means if that happens, this has been a success for all of us. So welcome, and we're going to get started. This is a song from Harry Chapin. I know a lot of people, Harry and I were talking, a lot of people aren't going to remember Harry. He's been gone for a while. This is a song he wrote for his brother, and I thought it was very appropriate for the an end of the year kind of song as we're moving on into a different type of calendar and some interesting times, as they say. Like I said, totally on my first. That's song number 2. Harry and I were having such a good time up here, just lying to each other. This is sing along for all the new folks. All my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the night time, and the daybreak comes around. All my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years go slowly on. Seems like I've been here before, I can't remember when, but I get this funny feeling that we'll all be together again. Those straight lines make up Very good. One of the lines in the song is, no straight lines within my life. And I think everybody can identify with that. And one of the things for some of the new people that we do here at Sunday Assembly is from time to time we do share some of our personal stories. And right now, on such an occasion, Jan Tucci is going to share part of her personal story with a talk that she's got called From Awe to Now.
Okay, I don't have a mic except here. Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me? Okay, great. I'm a teacher. I can talk loud. The years go slowly by. Sorry, but my days are going really fast. The word awe and awesome is something that's overused in our society. I was at the doctor's office last week, and they asked for my medical card, and when I handed it to her, she said, awesome. And I'm thinking, I'm in the doctor's office. What did she expect? And over the years, as a child and onward, there have been instances in my life when it has been awesome. And these awesome events that have happened in my life are really what brought me to Sunday Assembly. Because I've realized from watching the natural world how awesome it is, and how I don't need a supernatural to explain things, because the natural world is there for me to understand and to help me to understand what's going on in the world. So about several years ago, I was in Salt Lake City for a Unitarian Universalist conference, ironically, in New York, Utah. And one of the presenters there asked us to write down on a piece of paper something in our lives that could be considered awesome, because she felt that was overused. But do we have something in our lives that we would say, yes, this is awesome? So I'm sitting there thinking about this, and I got down to two things. The first thing was the birth of my grandson. My daughter-in-law very graciously allowed me to be in the room when my grandson, my first grandchild, was born. And I was the first person to see him arrive on this planet. And I was watching this happen, and I realized that my face was wet with tears because I was so overwhelmed by this. Now, I'd seen the birth of my two children, and it still wasn't quite as awesome as the birth of my grandson. And it was just truly awesome. The other one that I thought about was, I lived at a camp way up north, a Presbyterian camp, and it was 1,500 acres, very little light, only from the houses, a couple houses on the property. And so when you go out at night, it was pitch dark. And I had to go out one night to feed the horses, and it had snow. It was a new snow, new moon, so it was really dark. And I walked outside with this beautiful snow and everything, and I looked up, and the stars were touching. It was white with stars. I'd never seen that before. It was, oh my gosh, this was really awesome. I chose my grandson as the awesome thing that I wrote down. Even though the stars are pretty awesome, watching my grandson born was the most awesome thing that ever happened in my life. So all of these little awesome things that have happened in my life, watching the ants, for example, as a child, moving one little grain of something to someplace else, understanding about the planets and the stars and reading all these things, have led me to realize how amazing and how awesome our natural world is. I would challenge you to, this month, write down something that you feel was really awesome in your life. And sometime, if you'd like to share it with Sunday Assembly, let us know and share it with us. Thank you.
Awesome, Jan.
Well, originally we were scheduled to have some poetry.
We do.
Oh,
She's here.
awesome. No, I mean that. So, these are a couple of poems that Ann is going to share with us. And after the poems, we will have a moment of silence. So, Ann?
And there is a microphone here.
Can you all hear me without the microphone? No. 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 Okay. All right, here we go. My husband was Leonard Peterson, and he was a wonderful writer, a wonderful musician. He was a physicist at the University of Florida for 36 years. But he loved to write poetry, and whatever inspired him, he would decide to write. And this is something he said prior to the poem. I'll read it to you. Sometime the urge to be whimsical gets the best of me. If the mood is right, I then write a short bit of nonsense and laugh over it. So this is one of them. There's several, but this is one. And it's called Inside Out. Methinks it would be fun to see myself inside out. I've never seen those parts before, ever before. Watching my own heartbeat, my stomach churn, watching my tongue undulate from the far side, seeing what happens as my liver burns the evening's beer. And that was written in 1984. No, excuse me, 85. This one, called Recollection, was written about 3 weeks before he passed away. Passed away in February of 2014, and this was written in January of 2014. And I'll read you the preface of this. My parents were good-hearted, kind people. They also knew how to have fun. Mother had a quiet, gentle spirit, and Dad was loving and also very practical. Although not highly intelligent or educated, they knew the importance of education and passed that attitude on to me. These are the lyrics about them that can form the basis of a song. So maybe someone creative can write a song to this. It is meant to be happy, a bouncy song, but it also has a nostalgic touch. And this is called Recollection. There's a happy little place in the middle of my face where my lips turn up and towards my eyes, and my hands start to clap and my feet begin to tap as my papa asks my mother, please rise. And this is the chorus. They spin and they dance, they whirl and they prance. The years melt away as they sway. Then they wipe their brows and they take their bows. I remember that scene this day. They were a simple pair with a lot of love to share. Kept me safe, yet free to fly to the creek near my home, bare of feet and free to roam, to build a dam or sit and watch the sky. And then the chorus comes in again. They spin and they dance, they whirl and they prance. The years melt away as they sway. Then they wipe their brows as they take their bows. I remember that scene this day. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very, very nice, very touching. And now, Carol will introduce our speaker.
All over Ortiz is director of the award-winning Samuel Proctor Oral History Program and an associate professor of history at the University of Florida. He was president of the National Oral History Association in 2014-15. Dr. Ortiz is the author of the book Emancipation Betrayed, The Hidden History of Black Organizing and White Violence in Florida from Reconstruction to the Bloody Election of 1920, and of Remembering Jim Crow, African Americans Tell About Life in the Jim Crow South. Dr. Ortiz received his bachelor's degree from Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, and his PhD from Duke University. He is involved in many local causes and was quoted twice in the Gainesville Sun last week alone, once concerning racial disparities in the criminal justice system and once about the need for a living wage. We are honored to have Dr. Ortiz join us today to speak about Kurt Vonnegut's war, The Humanities in Combat.
Thank you so much for having me today, and I feel very blessed to be here to listen to amazing poetry and numbers of testimonials, and I think there's a theme for the day that I'll just kind of continue and say that I think Kurt Vonnegut was an awesome person. And how many of you have had the opportunity to read Sawdust Fox? So a lot of us have. And I want us to think about why this book is so important for us, for our society, for our community, for us here in Gainesville. It's a book that was written in the late 60s, and as Vonnegut tells us, in many ways it was the Vietnam War that made it possible for so many World War II veterans to begin to write very compellingly about their own experiences in World War II. What was it about the Vietnam War that really spurred that generation of writers? And so I'm thinking about people like Norman Mailer, who was a combat infantryman in the South Pacific. Of course, Mailer had written Naked and Dead earlier, but also people like Joseph Heller, people like Paul Fussell, people like Oliver Killens. And so what I want to do today is to just give you a very kind of general overview of Kurt Vonnegut, but also his generation, people who had also served in combat in World War II and came to really assess or reassess their experiences by what was happening around them in larger society. Now, at the outset, I have to make a confession. I've taught this book many times, and actually over here, I'd love to, because I'm a history professor, I love to have books, and you can just pass these around. These are just some of Kurt's books, and Joseph Heller's Catch-22, Mailer, Naked and the Dead. This is a wonderful book. This is Kurt Vonnegut's, it's a collection of essays called Armageddon in Retrospect. Vonnegut was, among other things, a tremendous commencement speaker. Schools and universities all over the world would invite him to come to commencements because you would never be able to predict what he was going to say. He would just say the most provocative things. But Armageddon in Retrospect has some of the most beautiful essays I've ever read about the experience of war. A couple of months ago for Veterans Day, I was asked to write about some of my experiences of war. So my war was in Central America in the mid-1980s. And some of my comrades and veterans of peace who are Vietnam or Korean War veterans, it's funny because, and Vonnegut will love this, when I was fighting the war in the mid-1980s, they were already protesting against that war. And so some of us probably crossed spaces, physical and spatial spaces at the same time, like Nicaragua, Honduras, so on and so forth. But Armageddon in Retrospect is Vonnegut's rumination on war, kind of past, present, and maybe even unfortunately future. As Vonnegut got older, he got angrier. And he was angry for a number of different reasons. The Iraq War in 2003 was an especially infuriating event for him because he felt that we would somehow be able to stop that war from happening. I think like a lot of us who were in the anti-war movement at that time, especially those of us who had been, had served in wars. And of course that didn't happen, the war happened. And his son Mark tells us that he was especially depressed because of that particular war. And his writings begin to take a quality of, I kind of think, of Mark Twain in the late 19th century. So Twain begins as a satirist, he writes funny things. As he gets older, he gets angrier, and he, in many ways, more concise. And so the adventures of Tom Sawyer become the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. A coming of age, kind of fun story about kids who do pranks and have a lot of fun and poke fun at the adults and get away with a lot of things. That's the adventures of Tom Sawyer. The adventures of Huckleberry Finn, a little later, it's more mature. It's still coming of age, but now it's about slavery. It's about white supremacy. It's about racism. And as Twain got even older, he began to write about war, about imperialism. And he wrote a number of pieces, and actually, because he knew Theodore Roosevelt, corresponded directly with Roosevelt during the American suppression of the Filipino War of Independence. And he wrote some really powerful ruminations on American imperialism. So Vonnegut, as he got older, got angrier as well. And he went from being a great novelist, and really one of the foremost novelists of American history, to being one of the foremost essayists of American history. So Armageddon, in retrospect, has some beautiful essays about war, and I encourage you, if you haven't read Vonnegut, go back and read Slaughterhouse-Five in the context of our lives now, in the context of where we are as a nation, where we are as a world. Because Vonnegut, when I started teaching Vonnegut years ago about him, I did it wrong, and this is an open admission. I would teach a novel like Slaughterhouse-Five, and I would say, especially when I was working with veterans, I would say, well, this is one of the early novels about PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. It's a novel about a veteran coming home. No one understands him, that he's been through one of the most traumatic experiences in all of human history, the firebombing of Dresden. And Vonnegut was a survivor of the firebombing of Dresden. And if you knew anything, one fact about him, that's the fact you need to understand. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes, and we have some photographs here. But Vonnegut was never, the reason he became increasingly frustrated, he felt he was never able to explain to people the horror of World War II, what he had experienced, what he had saw. And especially as he got older and our society had a tendency to romanticize, to glorify World War II, Vonnegut got angrier and angrier. And the same thing was true with Norman Mailer, the same thing was true with Joseph Heller, Catch-22, and the same thing was true with a lot of people from that generation. And they were saying, why are you glorifying the war? Why are you romanticizing it? Whether or not you think we had to fight it, war is never something to glorify or romanticize. But the way I taught the novel was all wrong. I taught it as a novel about a soldier who comes back, who's traumatized by his experiences, and heaven knows if you had been there the 2 days of the firebombing of Dresden, you would be traumatized as well. And so I taught it that way. Here's a story about a person who comes back who has a hard time sharing his experiences. He slips out of time. That's for Billy Pilgrim, right? He kind of falls out of the normal linear time stream. But it was wrong. What I should have been talking about was what Vonnegut increasingly accentuated in his writings, was that he was not talking about individual trauma per se. He was talking about the trauma of the entire civilization, the entire society that had sent him and sent his entire generation to fight this disastrous war. And so it was a critique not of an individual and not of an individual's attempted reintegration and failure to reintegrate into society, but it was a failure of the entire society. And let me explain to you what I mean by this. So I have a bunch of handouts, because I'm a history professor, I love handouts. So we're just going to kind of do a march through the handouts very concisely. And again, this is a quick overview of Vonnegut. But the first handout I want to commend your attention is PFC Vonnegut's letter to his family on his experience as a prisoner of war, because that's one thing you need to know about him as a writer. Now, that's a two-page handout. On the flip side of that, this suggested readings. And again, as I'm a teacher, you've got to have suggested readings, right? So these are just some books that come out of the World War II generation that get to what we call in Veterans for Peace the cost of war. The fact that war costs, especially with technological advances in the late 19th century, every war that we fight from this point on is going to impact civilians much more than it even will impact soldiers or sailors or Marines. Civilian casualties now, vis-a-vis direct servicemen's or servicewomen's casualties, run about 4 to 1. And that's because of technological advances that will never change in our lifetime. So war primarily impacts civilians. But when you flip that back over, and I'm not going to read the letter, but this is Kurt Vonnegut as a PFC. You know, he's a private first class. He's not a famous novelist. No one knows him. But he's writing about his experience of being in prison by the Germans. And he was quite brutally treated. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge. It was one of the last German offensives against the Allies in the Western Front. He was forced marched to a train. He was put on a train with thousands of other American and British and French POWs, sent to a prison camp. And on the way to the prison camp, their train was bombed, and over 150 of his comrades were killed, not by the Germans, but by the British. And Vonnegut had a whole series of these types of experiences which began to lead him to question the war. And at your leisure, please read the letter. It's very poignant, it's very powerful, but it's written right when Vonnegut gets out of, or when he's liberated by the Soviets. And so he's writing home to his family. The first chance he has time to say, hey, I'm alive. You probably thought I was dead, but I'm still alive and breathing. But he's beginning to develop that sense of irony and satire is here in this letter from this combat veteran who was a POW. Now, the second handout is the Slaughterhouse Five, the front matter here, in which Vonnegut, this was in the first edition of the book, in which he's describing who he is and how he wants us to think about him. A fourth generation German American, and that was very important for people to understand. Vonnegut talked a lot about ethnic identity and how important that was in his family. He came from a family of artists and engineers and scientists, and Vonnegut himself was a scientist in many ways. He also, those of you who went to grad school will love this story. After World War II, when he came back home, he actually went to grad school at University, or no, I'm sorry, I was getting Columbia, Chicago mixed up. Chicago University. And he wanted to get a degree in anthropology. He submitted his MA for anthropology and was rejected. And so he failed. He flunked out of grad school, right? Years later, University of Chicago was quite charitable, and after Vonnegut became very famous, went, I guess, reapproached him, and he actually was allowed to submit Cat's Cradle as his MA thesis. So he does have an MA from Chicago for Cat's Cradle. Now, Cat's Cradle, I'm not going to talk about that, but by the way, read that novel. It's about what? Automation. It's about a society that humans create in which humans become obsolete. Does that sound familiar? Vonnegut, because he was a scientist, was always thinking about these concepts and the ways in which we would use technology against ourselves. And that's another major theme of these great World War II writers, Joseph Heller and others in particular, Paul Fussell, who I won't have the chance to talk about. A big theme in their writings is how we develop technology of death and murder and use it because we feel we have to use it, because why? We have it, exactly. And that's a big theme in Vonnegut's work. And the question is, how can we get out of that feedback loop of developing these things? So you see the front matter, but what I want to draw to your attention as well is the wonderful piece of art that flanks that, which begins, where do I get my ideas from? And when I read this, and shortly after it came out, and Vonnegut did origami, he did all sorts of different types of art. He's an incredibly creative person. When I read this, I thought, oh my God, I mean, everything I've ever said about Kurt Vonnegut is just wrong, completely wrong. Because when he tells me and tells us, where do I get my ideas from? That's a very important question. If you ask an author, a novelist especially, what their characters mean, what's the story about, frequently they're going to respond with what? How are they going to respond to that kind of question? Well, what do you think? You know, I'm really interested in what you think. I mean, I wrote the book, but I don't even know the characters. Vonnegut would say that frequently. You tell me who Billy Pilgrim is. Who does he mean, you know, what does he mean to you? But this last line is really one of the tremendous lines, I think, in 20th and 21st century literature, where he's talking about where do my ideas come from. And I'll just skip to the last few sentences. It was goofing around like everybody else in Indiana. He loved Indiana. And all of a sudden stuff came gushing out. He's talking about the creative process in writing. It was discussed with civilization. And this is the big takeaway with Vonnegut, is his work is a critique of our entire system, our entire way of life. In his book, which went around, the funny little book about Dr. Kevorkian, where Dr. Kevorkian helps him have these afterlife experiences, and he gets to talk with people like Clarence Darrow, right? And then he gets to come back, you know. So his interaction with Clarence Darrow goes as following. He's like, everyone knows that Clarence Darrow is either one of the great attorneys and legal minds in American history. And Vonnegut comes back from this experience and he says, you know, I finally understand that the justice system is not really about justice. But he had to learn that from Clarence Darrow, and that's the interaction in that particular sequence. It was discussed with civilization. And again, I think of people like Mark Twain, who had the same kind of thematic, especially when we get to Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So you flip that over, and you see the dedication of Slaughterhouse-Five, and why that dedication is there. It's one of the great stories in American literature. You know, those of you familiar with Slaughterhouse-Five know this story, but when Vonnegut worked on that book for years, really for decades, and he had memory blocks, and he did have a trauma about being a survivor, and he would try to remember incidents that had occurred, but he couldn't remember them. So he would reach out to former comrades who had been POWs with him, and most of them were like, why are you asking me? I'm trying to forget that. I'm trying to put that experience as a POW in the firebomb behind me. But there's one person that responded to him, Bernard O'Hare. And so Vonnegut went out to be with his friend who had been a POW with him in Dresden, Germany, and to try to help him remember. Because Vonnegut had been working on this book, it was called his Dresden book. And he'd been working on it for years and years, and so many false starts, so many writing blocks. And he wanted Bernard O'Hare to help him remember what had happened to them in Dresden. And so he gets to his house, and Bernard O'Hare, and Vonnegut brings his kids, and they're playing with Bernard O'Hare and Mary O'Hare's children, and the kids get sent upstairs at a certain point. And Mary O'Hare is very angry at both her husband and Kurt Vonnegut. And Kurt can't figure out why, I wonder why she's so angry with him. And finally they have it out. And Mary O'Hare has this, and I'm not going to read this out loud, but this is the passage that Vonnegut remembers of the interaction. And basically it comes down to Mary O'Hare telling Kurt Vonnegut and her husband, y'all are just going to create another World War II novel. And it's going to become a movie. It's going to star John Wayne and Frank Sinatra. And it's going to glorify war. But the bottom line is it's going to encourage people to create more wars. And they'll be fought by babies like the babies upstairs. That's where the kids are playing. And so Vonnegut has this epiphany, and this is where the subtitle of the book comes from. And it's very important for us to remember what the subtitle of Slaughterhouse-Five is. It's what? Children's Crusade. And we need to understand what the Children's Crusade was and what war is. And if you look at the real honest books about World War II, these are the people that fought that war. They were children. And when I show these photographs to my students, they're kind of shocked. They're like, these look like kids. I'm like, yeah, because they were kids. And Mary O'Hare, as a mother, is trying to tell the Kurt Vonnegut and her husband, don't create another lot. Because Lord knows, by the mid-60s, when this meeting occurs, there already had been enough John Wayne, Frank Sinatra movies about World War II, right? So this is why he calls it Children's Crusade. And then underneath here are just some interactions. The interactions between Kurt Vonnegut and Mark Vonnegut. Mark Vonnegut, by the way, an amazing writer in his own right. Wrote about his own kind of nervous breakdown, having schizophrenia, is a renowned pediatrician who's taught at Harvard. Mark has become kind of Kurt's literary benefactor in some ways. But I will read this quote at the bottom, we'll go to the next handout. Mark Vonnegut is talking about his father's writing style and why he writes and how he writes. This is what he says. In my early to mid-20s, my father let it slip that he was afraid that therapy might make him normal. Because all throughout his life, coming back from World War II, people tried to get Kurt Vonnegut to go into therapy. You know, man, you need to see a counselor. You know, this stuff you're writing is really weird. You know, don't you think you need to get, you know. And so my early to mid-20s, as Mark Vonnegut was growing up, he let it slip that he was afraid that therapy might make him normal and well-adjusted, and that would be the end of his writing. I tried to reassure him that psychiatrists weren't nearly that good. and that's from Dr. Mark Vonnegut, right? Pediatrician. But again, it gets us back to the major theme I've shared today, which is that Kurt Vonnegut believed that maladjustment to a sick civilization is not health. If you're asking me to adjust to a civilization that glorifies war, that perpetuates war, that's not health. That's actually, what you call maladjustment is actually having a conscience. And that's really where Kurt Vonnegut lived his final decades. The last handout I want to share with you is really a grim handout. I apologize for this, but again, in order for us to understand Vonnegut, we've got to understand him as a person who's a prisoner of war and who survived this horrific event. And so I just give here an overview of Dresden, like kind of before and after the firebombing. There's thousands of images on, Google Images. There's been many articles, many books about the controversy surrounding the bombing of Dresden. But Kurt Vonnegut was there. And Dresden, the experience was that the Allies would fly these enormous air raids. The planes would cross overhead on a daily basis, of course, but they would never drop anything on Dresden because Dresden wasn't really a military target. 2 days after the firebombing, a small group of planes came over Dresden after it had been turned into this wreckage and dropped leaflets to explain to the people of Dresden, Germany, why they had been bombed. And essentially the leaflets said, and Vonnegut was by that time on aerial detail. He was literally scraping people's bodies out of cellars. Because when incendiary devices hit, an incendiary device is not like a bomb. When an incendiary device hits a building, it just burns through, and it just burns everything, any organic matter is burnt. And because of the high, it's hard to explain, but because of the high temperatures, the oxygen is literally sucked out of the air. Okay? And so Vonnegut was in a slaughterhouse, an industrial slaughterhouse when it was happening. And as luck would have it, it was probably the best and maybe the only relatively secure air raid shelter to survive this kind of, or to endure this type of bombing. But everything else was wiped out. I want you to think about the city before and after. So Vonnegut comes out of the slaughterhouse, and because he's a POW, he's immediately sent to what they call burial detail. But within a matter of 2 days, it's realized that what's happened to people physically is going to prevent the Germans from actually, taking people out of a building, reinterring them, and burying them. So basically, the burial detail becomes a flamethrower detail. They're essentially, they begin to, the flip side here is people are essentially gathered to these gathering points and they're incinerated because there's just no way to bury so many people in such a small period of time. And Vonnegut tells us towards the end of his life that, and it's interesting when you think about, the supernatural versus non-supernatural nature and so on and so forth. Vonnegut believed his comrades who told him they could still hear the screams of people as they were walking through the streets, and they would turn around and no one would be there. But they swore they could hear this happening while they were doing this. And so I want you at your own leisure again to read that passage. It's from Armageddon Retrospect. I highly commend the book to you, where Vonnegut's talking about the experience of being on burial detail in Dresden. And he's trying to get this across in Slaughterhouse 5, but so many people miss that basic point about the book. They got the time travel thing, it was kind of edgy, but they missed the seriousness of what he was trying to get across and why he becomes unhinged in time, if you will. And he really, and this is such a powerful quote here, it is with some regret that I here besmirch the nobility of our airmen, but boys, you killed an appalling lot of women and children. And Vonnegut, and I'll kind of conclude on this point, these writers like Mailer, Vonnegut, Paul Fussell, Oliver Killens, who unfortunately I haven't had a chance to really talk about, came up with different interpretations of whether or not World War II was necessary or not, or whether Allied involvement was necessary. But again, where they all agreed was on the dangers of glorifying or romanticizing or turning war, any war, into a tale of redemption. Vonnegut did not want to hear about war as a story of redemption, because the war he experienced, World War II, was not a redemptive war at all, any way, shape, or form. But I'll conclude here and then open a question to answer by an anecdote I learned from one of my colleagues in science. After Vonnegut came back from World War II, he began to really follow carefully the career of an MIT professor by the name of Norbert Wiener. And Wiener was the father of cybernetics, a brilliant MIT physicist and mathematician. And he was the person who developed high-speed calculating machines, which, as you know, will become eventually computers. So Vonnegut, we know from his correspondence, began following Wiener's career very carefully. And what Wiener began to do to get a lot of attention was, shortly after the end of World War II, and a lot of Wiener's mathematical concepts had actually went into the development of high-tech munitions during the war. But after the end of the war, and especially after the horrors of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the firebombings of Tokyo, Dresden, of Coventry, the German bombing, Wiener really began to question, again, the relationship between science, society, and what Dwight Eisenhower called military-industrial complex, or originally the congressional military-industrial complex. And so Wiener says, Wiener began to refuse cooperating with the federal government, and he began to refuse accepting any federal grants which he felt could lead to using his work, applying his work towards military applications. And Wiener, of course, was called out for this. He was called a communist and all these great things. But his response was, quote, the degradation of the position of the scientist as an independent worker and thinker to that of a morally irresponsible stooge in a science factory has proceeded even more rapidly and devastatingly than I expected. In view of this, I still see no reason to turn over to any person, whether he be an army officer or the kept scientist of a great corporation. Ooh, that hurts. Kept scientist of a great corporation, any results which I obtain if I think they are not going to be used for the best interests of science and humanity. So, again, the use of technology to destroy humanity becomes a major theme in Vonnegut's work. And the final thing I'll say about Vonnegut is he was a person who was, we talk about resistance, but Vonnegut resisted, I think, with every ounce of his being, and his writing was his being. The tendency of self-destructiveness in humanity through war, through the use of technology against ourselves, just again, an awesome person. So, thank you.
So what does this say about, he's talking about the human condition, it seems like to me.
Yeah.
And are we irredeemable? Because half of us are below normal in intelligence. That section of the populace gets manipulated very effectively by the corporatocracy. So
Yeah.
where is there any hope?
For Vonnegut, it was writing, and it was constant communication, talking, listening. And he would talk often about how what he learned growing up in his hometown, again, he loved Indiana, but going to Bernard O'Hare, they actually went together back to Dresden. This is an interesting experience where, and this is kind of a logical response to your question, John, but Howard Zinn, who flew a number of combat missions and was involved in another catastrophic firebombing of a civilian town in France. Howard Zinn went back to that town and actually talked to the people who he had helped murder, and had fellowship with them. They talked together. And this village, by the way, is called Rouen. It's in South France. They've sued their government for reparations because they blame the French government for this disaster. What had happened was Howard was in a bombing mission where they had been sent to bomb the German armored division tanks, and they either missed the target or they were given the wrong coordinates. And so instead of dropping napalm, or the prototype for napalm, on German tanks, they dropped it on a French village. But Zinn and that generation, for them, it was writing. And so many of them came back, and Paul Fussell as well. Paul Fussell was an infantry platoon commander, or leader. And he said, so many of us came back from the war to become English professors because we felt that writing and communication was a way we could help the next generation avoid the travesties that we had participated in. Now, obviously, World War II, we have Korea, we have Vietnam, all these wars, but still, for Vonnegut doesn't hold out hope for us. What he holds out is the possibility of continuation of living, right? The affirmation of human life. He believed nothing was more sacred. He loved nature. He hated what we were doing to nature. But for him, he had to write it out. But there isn't any solace there. There isn't any kind of redemptive, uplifting, happy ending. I mean, was there ever any Kurt Vonnegut novel that had a happy ending?
No.
But the striving, the struggle, I mean, that's what he does leave us with, I think.
Not a happy ending, but a happy side effect
Yes.
of war. This comes from my parents who were in the Second World War in the Netherlands. And they said that friendships that were formed during the war were not at all comparable to any other friendships they had ever had, because the ties were so strong of helping one another that after all these years, and they survived it both, and so did the rest of the family, they said, you people don't ever make friends, they said to their children, such as me. You just have sort of happy acquaintances, but we know what it means to have friends. When you have no food to eat, your neighbor comes over with a little handful of rice.
Right.
That's a friend, what you call a friend. So sometimes there are happy side effects, is what my parents used to say.
The fraternity, again, the belonging, you get this in Slaughterhouse Five and Cat's Cradle, in a lot of Vonnegut's novels, right? People coming together in assembly, if you will. But Vonnegut was always interested in those moments of possibility, because you're exactly right. I mean, when he wrote about World War II, I mean, hunger is a constant theme. If you're a POW, if you're a civilian, you're always hungry. Vonnegut lost at least 50 pounds. He already wasn't a very big man to begin with. But yeah, and then it's no mistake that he goes back to Bernard O'Hare who survived this horrific thing, and they formed this lifelong friendship based out of that. Yeah. Yes.
I was reading in his letter to his father that he says, "I was one of the few who weren't wounded, but for that much, thank God." What were his feelings about God? I've heard that he was a human affect, his feelings towards war and the future of civilization.
Right, that's an excellent question. It's a big, big question. Well, yeah, I mean, in that letter, you're seeing him like a transition of Vonnegut, who would probably not have come out in 1944. He's not ready to say, "Hey, I'm a humanist." And there's a little bit of irony. There's some satire in that. Thank God, I was the one that survived. Oh, and that becomes, and so it goes in later Vonnegut writings. But he was also the president actually of the Humanist Society, this national organization, some of you may be familiar with. And he actually, the person who preceded him was an equally famous person that we can't remember, but that did have a big impact on his writing. God shows up in some Vonnegut writings and essays, but he's always he's more of kind of a, how do I say this, more of like a West African or a Greek kind of God who interacts with humans and argues with humans, and humans argue back with the God or the gods. And Vonnegut did have that. The Kevorkian book, which he wrote towards the end of his life, would probably be a good place to kind of start to kind of respond to your question, because Vonnegut changes over time. But at least by the late 50s, early 60s, he's very much writing in a very much a humanist vein. And that's quite interesting because a lot of, if you're familiar with humanism in general, a struggle of that belief has been to kind of communicate to people of other faith-based traditions that yes, you can have a moral system of beliefs as a humanist, even a person who doesn't believe in a supernatural power or a god or a set of gods. But that was very important to him. But he plays with that though. I mean, I think his interactions with the creator or creators are themselves generally quite humorous, and sometimes they're playing tricks on humans, kind of again like West African or kind of Greek deities. Yeah. But he was president of the Humanist Society. The little factor just popped in my head. Yeah.
Unrelated question: the pamphlets that were dropped after the bombing, what was the justification given for why Dresden fired?
Oh, and this one. Yeah, I mean, this is where you get the beginning of Vonnegut's novelistic sensibility. So the pamphlets said to the effect that, sorry about that, but, unfortunately you were casualties of war, and we did have legitimate military targets. What the pamphlet said was that the military target, even though there are no factories or munitions in the city, the target were rail lines going through the city, delivering war material to the German war effort. And because Vonnegut was on the ground, and because he was POW, he writes later. Look at photographs of the destruction, and it seems like the Allies hit and destroyed every single building and structure except for the rail lines. He said that a few of the rail lines had suffered minor damage that were repaired within 3 days of being damaged. That's how minimal that damage was. Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you picked up on that. But yeah, can you imagine? I mean, this was very frequent during World War II. They would drop, each side would drop pamphlets. John Oliver Killens talks about, and Killens, in his book, which if you put your hand, I suggest a reading. Again, let me mention this real briefly because it's a wonderful book. And then we heard the thunder. The Japanese and the Germans would drop pamphlets on African American military units. And because they tried to figure out, like, how do we get these guys to stop fighting us? And so their pamphlets would be things like, Negro, your fight is at home. When you leave this war and go back home, you will be lynched. You will not be allowed to vote. You will have no rights. So why are you here halfway across the world fighting us? You know, we're not the enemy. World War II, and even World War I, these guys, you know, constantly dropping leaflets and pamphlets. It's a propaganda war, as you would say. But I highly commend that Killen's book. And then we heard the thunder. It's a powerful account. And Killen's was one of those combat veterans who came out of World War II, questioning the dominant narrative of the war. And so he writes about his experiences in the South Pacific. As a African-American soldier. Any questions or? I was lucky enough to sit next to a gentleman who actually saw Kurt Vonnegut give a commencement address. Well, thank you so much for your attention. And, I'm going to move them because I understand that we're going to have a potluck, but I want you to remember that books can be food too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ortiz. It's very, very interesting and enlightening. Every now and then you think you're kind of tuned into some things and you go, whoa, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. So thank you very much, sir. A bit of a somewhat somber song, but when I heard that this was what Dr. Ortiz's talk was going to be about, I really had to rack my brains to find something that couldn't quite bring myself to be like happy bouncy after this. This is probably the best I could come up with. I told Harry I had one other talk. It wasn't quite as sing-alongish, if you will. Maybe we'll drag that out another time. Listen, children, to a story that was written long ago. and that we try to do as a group is to help often. That's always been very important. And now, even more so, it seems as if recent events are any indication of things to come, it will become more and more important as we move forward in the coming year. And here to give us a bit of an update on some of the things that we do as a group, and we encourage you to join us and help out, even if not through this group, whatever small way each of us can possibly do, that's just part of what we believe in here. So here to give us an update on some of the things we do is Roxanne Levin.
Hi. One of the ways in which we help often, and this is our theme of the month, is I volunteer at Grace Marketplace, and many of you help to hard-boiled eggs. Eggs are very popular among the homeless. They really like it. I take 120 hard-boiled eggs to Grace Marketplace every week, every Wednesday, and they're all gone. In fact, we sometimes run out. So this is one of the ways, and if you're interested in helping us, we can still use people to boil eggs and either bring them to my house or, depending on where you live, or take them out to Grace Marketplace. Sometime between Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. I go for breakfast, so I leave the house at 6 o'clock in the morning. If anybody has any other ideas for reaching out into the community, that would be very welcome also. There are plenty of us, and not everybody is able to help with Grace Marketplace. They also need clothing, they need bedding, they need mattresses, anything that will help. Because the homeless don't carry their items. They don't carry a bed, they don't carry mattresses, they don't carry much of anything on their backs. So if you have any kind of bedding or anything that would help them when they move out into the community, into their own apartment, it would be very much appreciated by Grace Marketplace. Another way of helping Grace Marketplace is monetary donations. They're always in need of money. In order, they continue to need to expand so that they can help more people live in an actual, with a roof over their heads. And because in the wintertime, they have to take in people, and they're not sleeping in dormitories. They're kind of sleeping in big areas that have a roof and maybe one wall, but the rest of it is screened. So anyway, we have been very successful in helping Grace Marketplace, and I appreciate everybody who has been contributing, and if you want to contribute too, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Please give that some serious consideration. Any of you who have been out to Grace can understand the need that is very real and very much out there. And a lot of the, having been out there, the help is very much appreciated by those who we do help. Right now, we're going to do kind of the traditional passing of the hat, passing of the, I guess we're doing hats today in our plate. Anything you can do to help defray our costs. Everybody that you see here that's involved in this, there is no monetary compensation for any of the people who help put this together. The expenses go to, and contributions go directly to just maintaining the overhead, renting this room, and occasionally making the donations and helping prepare the meals out at Grace Marketplace. So that was not me. How rude. How rude. So anyway, the money does not go into anybody's pocket. It goes strictly back out into the community and to help pay for the lights and whatever, the few dollars we spend to try to get you folks together and give everybody a place to hang out and that sort of thing. So very much appreciated. A couple of quick announcements while the collection's making its way around. Our next program will be on January 15th, right back here. And Ms. Peggy McDonald will be speaking about Dr. Sarah Robb, who was the first female physician in this county. There are some exhibits to that effect in the Madison Museum if you've ever been down there and had the opportunity to see some of the stuff that's down there, but she will be talking on that, and that will be on January 15th. Also, if you can't get enough, and we haven't driven you nuts already, and you want to hang out with some of these fine folks, on January 8th at Jason's Deli, out at the old small plaza, it's a very informal get-together, kind of hanging out and, share a little food and whatever else is going on and stuff. So, if you're so inclined, feel free to join the folks out there. And if you know some friends of yours who are like-minded in this, in these ideals and pursuits of, helping to kick things up to just a little bit better level every day, please ask them to join us. What we love to see is get this room full enough to where we have to request a bigger room. So, that being said, thank you all for coming. Please stick around for the potluck. Even if you didn't bring any food, that is not a requirement. You'll notice that we did not check on your way in the door to see, do you have a potluck? We don't, it's open. There's always plenty of food. So, those who bring are willing to share, and if you didn't have the opportunity or just too bloody late, just handle it. It's not a word. The food is here, it's free. It needs to be eaten because most of us don't like to take all the leftovers home. So please enjoy yourselves. And we'll take a few minutes after the last song to get rearranged and stuff. But we are going to close out. I had a couple of people suggest a song. This is just a happy-go-lucky, good fun rock and roll song. And this is how we're going to end our year.